Thank you so much. So, hi everyone, welcome. I'm so glad everyone's here. I'm Jess Barnashone and I'm head of Babyzone Hubs. I'm joined today by my brilliant colleagues Sarah and Claire as well, who are in the sidelines. They're part of the Babyzone team and they'll be looking after the chat and gathering your questions for our Q&A a bit later on in this session. So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. And for our regulars, it's lovely to see you again. Just before we get started, just a quick couple of housekeeping items. So everyone's microphones are muted and cameras are off. That's completely normal for a session of this size. So don't worry if you can't hear or see yourself, that's how it's supposed to be. You'll be able to chat using the chat box and we'll have a proper Q&A question and answer time later on where we'd love to hear from you. So just so you know as well, your messages that you send in the chat will only come through to the Babyzone team rather than to everyone in the room. So if you want to share anything at all or ask any questions, we hope that makes you feel more comfortable that only the Babyzone team can see it. There are no silly questions. And if you're thinking it, chances are everyone else is too. So please make sure you do ask those questions. So we are, as you know, recording this session and we're going to be posting the recording onto our WhatsApp community groups, if you're a member of a Babyzone WhatsApp community group, and onto the Babyzone website afterwards. So you can come back to it at any time and you can also share it with anyone that wasn't able to make this lunchtime session today. So, screens. If you have a little one nearby or you've had a moment today where you've handed over a phone or a tablet just to get 5 minutes of peace, you're in very good company. We're not here to judge anyone. Parenting is really hard, and screen time is one of those topics that seems to come with a lot of guilt attached to it. We want to change that a little bit today. We're going to start with a couple of quick poll questions, so keep your eye on your screen in just a moment. It's completely anonymous and there are no right or wrong answers. So just going to give you a minute or two just to have a look at those questions. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for everyone who voted in that poll and gave us some insights, really helpful for us to understand who's here and where you're coming from. Right, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our brilliant experts today. Firstly, we have Dr Sanjiv Nichani OBE. Dr Nichani is a consultant paediatrician at Leicester Children's Hospital, and he's going to help us understand the science behind why screens are so compelling for young children and why that's really not our fault or our children's fault either. And then we have Penny Piggott, who is an NHS educational psychologist and leads the Phones Away Talk and Play campaign in Cornwall. Penny is going to bring it all back to real life, the everyday moments and the small things we can do that really make a difference. So without any further ado, Dr. Nichani, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Hope this works. Can you see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I just need to make it. Just trying to get it to a slide. Yeah, there we go. I want to make want to make you feel seasick. There we go. Okay. Thanks very much for the invitation. My name is Sanjiv Nichani. I'm a consultant paediatrician in Leicester Children's Hospital. I've coined the term the screamedemic, which I will explain in due course. I'm also the author of a book called Movement is Medicine, which literally talks about that very issue and shows how physical activity is as good for the brain as it is for the body. Now, Jessica has already set the scene nicely by saying, and I agree with this, parenting is very difficult. The old adage that it takes a village to raise a child is particularly true today. There's lots of pressure on parents stating the obvious. I also want to mention something which is obvious to everybody, but something that we often forget, and that is childhood and adolescence is the longest in the animal kingdom. And essentially, it sets us apart from the rest of the mammals. It differentiates humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. And whilst it is hugely important for the final product, i.e. adult human beings, it presents various stages of vulnerability. And it's sadly those stages of vulnerability which screens, smartphones, and social media apps have had such a profound impact on. Now, social media apps, etc., smartphones were released about, let's say, 15 years ago. Facebook was 20 odd years ago. 2004. It's literally only in the last 2 or 3 years that we have found the evidence, we've understood what devices, what smartphones, and what social media apps do to the developing brain, starting from early childhood into teenage years. And I'm going to focus predominantly on early childhood for this talk. At birth, the brain is 25% of the size of the adult brain, and that rapidly increases to 90% by the age of 6 years. And what underpins this increase? There's a massive increase in neurogenesis, which is the creation of nerve cells, the formation of nerve cells, which is why you will see a child's head literally growing, because the brain is growing. These nerve cells, which are then created, migrate to different parts of the brain, responsible for a myriad and a bewildering variety of different functions. These nerve cells are connected by junctions, and these junctions are called synapses. And in early childhood, there is a huge number of synapses, and there are lots and lots of brain cells. One way of describing the state in early childhood, state of the brain, the growth of the brain, is a dense, chaotic web of nerve cells and connection between the nerve cells called synapses. And that is to allow a child to develop and to imbibe, to absorb all the information, the stimulation that he or she is subject to and experiences on a day in and day out. And that's why we say children are like sponges, because they are, because their brains are growing very rapidly and installing information. Now, this is built on a principle of neuroplasticity. That is, the brain is very reactive and very responsive to what the child sees, feels, practices, and learns. And literally, because of this feature of neuroplasticity, i.e. input-related growth of the brain, every experience a child has helped strengthen some brain connections and weaken others. In other words, if a part of the brain, like the language center, is stimulated repeatedly, recurrently by hearing vocabulary from siblings, from parents, grandparents, siblings, friends, etc., from the environment, the language center gets very strong. Reading stories strengthens attention and memory pathways. Loving interactions strengthen emotional security pathways. Physical play strengthens movement and coordination pathways. And the brain is literally wiring itself and expanding secondary to these recurrent and repeated experiences. This is really, really important, crucial part of growing up. And this chaotic web of neurons and neuron connections is what supports, what sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom, i.e. learning, language acquisition, sensory mapping, social and emotional development. Now, there's also a process called pruning or streamlining. If centers of the brain are not used adequately, as can happen in children with emotional neglect, then parts of the brain start to shrink because the regular repetitive stimulation need to make the brain cells grow and need to make the brain cells talk to each other are not present. And as the slide says, unused pathways are selectively eliminated, while frequently activated pathways, like I've described, are strengthened. And this use-dependent process shapes future network, and it's the process that sculpts the final functional architecture of how the brain works and how the child and then the teenager actually develops into adults. Now, this is not quite breaking news, but as of the 19th of April, 2024, it was. Ofcom published a study which said that 25% of 5 to 7-year-olds have a smartphone, and 75% of 5 to 7-year-olds had a device or an iPad, etc. Now, the screamedemic. I mentioned the screamedemic. What do I mean by the screamedemic? The screamedemic is the epidemic of mental health illness in children and young people, as well as early language communication problems in toddlers due to excessive screen time, device time, smartphone use, and social media apps. And just to set the scene, some very quick statistics. 35 to 40% of teenagers spend 6 or more hours per day on smartphones and social media apps. Many of you have older children as well. That's why I'm mentioning these statistics. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that 6 or more hours per day on weekdays and more on weekends is clearly an addiction. 30% of toddlers do not know how to turn the pages of a book, they swipe instead. And children and young people spend the equivalent of a full-time job on smartphones and social media. And the screamedemic has therefore led to skyrocketing mental health illness, non-verbal children. What do I mean by that? I've seen, and this is one of the things that got me really alarmed as to what I'm seeing in my practice. Many children who walk into my clinic with normal coordination, normal mobility, don't say a word. They have this glazed look on their face and they're drawn to inanimate objects. Now, some of those, yes, have developmental issues in their brain, like autism, etc. But many others have become like that because of what I described to you in a few slides earlier. They're spending most of their waking hours passively in front of a screen. They're not hearing vocabulary from parents, grandparents, siblings, cousins, etc., etc. Their language center has not developed because they're stuck in front of the screen as their parents are, and they are shown flashing images which make sounds but doesn't have the same effects. And there's also an entity called acquired ADHD, which is also relevant in early childhood and virtual autism. And all of these effects are because the brain, because devices, smartphones, and social media apps affect the same parts of the brain that is responsible for the emotional and psychological well-being of children and young adults. So teenagers are lost to friends, family, hobbies, and academia. And the effects on toddlers and young children, as I've already mentioned, language delays and communication difficulties due to the passive, hypnotic, fast-paced, colorful images that these toddlers are being shown for hours and hours. Now, if you go back in evolution, our brain, particularly in early childhood, is not geared to cope with this passive, hypnotic, fast-paced, colorful images. It causes a stress reaction in the brain because the brain thinks it has to be doing what our hunter-gatherer forefathers had to do: survive, keep an eye out for threats. And that's what such images do. They cause a stress on the very young brain. In addition, because there's very little interaction with family, etc., and the environment, these toddlers are prone to emotional dysregulation, temper tantrums, and features of ADHD very early on. Now, I'm not going to blind you with science. All I want to do is share some headlines, just headlines of some very clear and powerful studies that have examined this issue in more detail. This study was published in March 24, a very reputed journal, and basically it showed, in the context of what I've been talking about, for every additional minute of screen time, children heard fewer adult words, spoke fewer vocalizations, and engaged in fewer back and forth interaction. This reduced interaction between children and parents is associated with delayed language development and a reduced ability of children to interact with others because they are stuck, hypnotized in front of screens. Another very large study, 7,100 mother-child pairs, basically showed greater screen time for children aged 1 year was associated with development delays and communication and problem solving at the age of 2 and 4, because the rest of the brain is not being stimulated. It's just the emotional circuitry of the brain, the reward system of the brain that's being stimulated. The rest of the brain is not developing as I mentioned it should earlier on. So if you think about it, screen time at the age of 1 is causing ramifications in early childhood. I've done multiple lectures to school teachers who are telling me that many children are coming ill-prepared for primary school. The language is poor, their posture is poor, many of them are not even potty trained. And part of that is because they're stuck in front of screens and doing very little else. Also, we've discussed this, another study showing what I mentioned earlier on. Tablet use at the age of 3.5 was associated with emotional dysregulation, more expressions of anger and frustration at the age of 4.5. And that is again for this reason. The child is hypnotized and addicted to these screens that causes difficulty interacting and coping with the surrounding environment, friend, family, etc. Now, this might be a cartoon, but actually it represents what is happening in real life currently. Nursery workers are telling us that when toddlers are dropped off to nursery, they're not having a tantrum when the parents are leaving, as used to be the case. They're having a tantrum when the device is taken away with the parents. And let me state the obvious, but the role of parents is really important. The parents are the role models. Children learn from parents. And what does science tell us? Well, actually, what does science tell us? Children whose parents use screens a lot had a lower aptitude in grammar and vocabulary, according to this fairly large study published in Estonia. And this is really important for parents to remember. Whilst parenting is clearly very difficult, parents must lead by example. And this study, a rather sobering study, showed that 2,300 5-year-olds who spend 2 or more hours per day on screens significantly associated ADHD behaviors. They were nearly 6 times more likely to present with hyperactivity, inattention, impulsivity. And the reason, the science behind that is very clear. And that is devices, smartphones, and apps affect the emotional circuitry of the brain, which is developing, and development is impeded. Now, this is a schematic diagram representing the emotional circuitry. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain. Once again, I'm not going to give you a lecture, but just to say it's the center for emotional regulation. Other parts of the brain are the emotional circuitry of the brain, and in early childhood, they're very active and very vulnerable to things like devices. And the prefrontal cortex is not mature enough to teach a child or indeed a teenager what is right and what is wrong. And that is why children, because of the immaturity of the emotional circuitry, are sitting ducks and very vulnerable to the mal effects of devices, smartphones, etc. Very quickly, there's the same problems in teenagers. Very large study looked at persistent, frequent social media use. And I put this down because many of you, I'm sure, have older children. Persistent, frequent social media use predicted low well-being amongst girls for life satisfaction, happiness, and was associated with great anxiety. And boys also had very significant problems. Now, this slide is an infuriating slide, which I want to share with you because, as I said, many of you will have older children. TikTok, that you're all aware of, has this poisonous version in the rest of the world. Let me introduce you to the sanitized version. It's twin in China. It's called Douyin. The use is capped at 40 minutes. The content must be scientific, cultural, wholesome human stories. Moderators remove the trash from the app. The app is not available between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And they're supposed to popularize health and fitness channels, and hallelujah, influencers are banned. And I'm sure you all know how poisonous and dangerous TikTok is for the rest of the world. Now, what advice do we give to parents? Bearing in mind how difficult parenting is, what do we say for the not to fives? I've created a 5-a-day infographic, which is present available on the NHS for Under 5 website. So what do I say? Tip number 1, the only screen time between 0 and 2 years should be video chatting. They should not be given a device or a screen. It's not good for their brains. If you must give a device to your child for video chatting, it should be a bigger one. Tip number 2, and the government has belatedly, but recently released some guidelines as to how much screen time there should be. They've said, and I slightly differ with them on this, they said screen time for 2 to 5-year-olds should be 1 hour. I would strongly recommend 30 minutes. That's tip number 2. Tip number 3, bigger screens. If you must give your child a screen, give a child a bigger screen, because lots of opticians, ophthalmologists, etc. are telling us many children are needing glasses more than previously because of the eye strain that's been caused by using smaller screens and devices for long periods of time. Tip number 4, a device is not a digital babysitter, a digital pacifier, or a digital dummy. There are instances, I've just finished a clinic, when you might want a toddler to be quiet. That is really the only indication, or one of very few indications, for you to use a digital device to settle your child. Tip number 5, sleep hygiene, really important. Sleep is a very important part of our health from birth to the end of life. And tip number 5 is avoid giving under 5 screens for at least 2 hours before bedtime. Instigate a regime, a bath, or whatever it might be. Read a story, as we've discussed earlier on in the talk, how important that is to stimulate the brain. Do not give your child a screen for at least 2 hours before bedtime, because this is what we have got to avoid. Now, as I said, humanity has sleepwalked into this. This is not about apportioning blame. But now that we know what screens are doing for all ages, from early childhood to teenage years, we must take action now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nichani. That was really fascinating. And to know more of the science behind what we're talking about is so interesting. And I hope everyone found that really interesting to listen to. Knowing the science is one thing, and thinking about what that actually looks like at home, at meal times, on a long journey, or when you're just trying to get through the day. So that's exactly where Penny comes in. So Penelope, you work with families every day through your Phones Away Talk and Play campaign. And I know hopefully parents are going to find this really practical and really reassuring. So over to you. And just a reminder to everyone, you obviously can ask your questions in the chat, and we'll come into that Q&A session following Penny. But thank you so much, Penny. Off you go.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that was really interesting. And thank you, Dr. Nichani, for that sort of lead up to this. So I'm coming to you. I'm a psychologist, and thinking really. I'll tell you a little bit about the campaigning call and where we started from. But I suppose we're all living in this digital world, aren't we? We all have to navigate it together. So it's a sort of team effort, I suppose, is what we're trying to do here. And I know that particularly in Babyzone that you're going to get some support from the hubs and working together and talking to each other as parents, which is such a key thing to be doing as well, chatting about it. So yeah, I live and work in Cornwall, have done for over 20 years, and before that I was a teacher, a primary school teacher in London, and did some training in Cheshire as well. But I'm just thinking about in the digital world, like me as Penny, you know, I had a Nokia flip phone, I've got an iPhone, I have to navigate that in terms of my own social media use. I had Instagram, I found that difficult. I had a bit of Facebook that I look at occasionally. I have LinkedIn for work. We need it for banks, for holidays. And I suppose I'm going to be talking to you today about the balance for us as adults and parents in showing children and modelling to them as ourselves, because children copy what they see in the community around them. So I'm going to be talking with a slightly different angle in terms of screen use, but thinking about actually what we can do to model to children as well. So just thinking about me as a mum, I've got a device that I use. Like I said, I have to check college stuff, school stuff, appointments, GP appointments. Just think about how much of our lives are drawn to these devices and how much children in our lives will be seeing us drawn to them as well. We have to look at them for immunisations, for permission slips, for hundreds of things throughout the day. Detentions that might come our way with the secondary school children. I was also thinking when I was planning for this, thinking about even within the workplace, you know, a lot of people now work from home. So you'll be working in front of your screen for work, and you might have a work phone, you might have your own phone, navigating appointments. For example, all my work I have to do digitally, write up all my notes, so everything's online. And I suppose I'm just using that as an example about being in this digital world together. So I think it's about all the science we've just heard about is really, really important, and those screen guidance for under fives and for being really, really aware of the damage that excessive use can be. So it's really good for us to have that in our mind, thinking about this next thing we're thinking about. So I was thinking about like just that sort of balance during the day and how to find that balance in these busy lives. And really refocus our attention on the children in front of us when they're there in front of us, so that we really are spending our day thinking about that. But also, I've also been considering the nuances and the subtleties of individual families. Everybody has different needs. And I'm thinking that with you all here today listening, that everyone will have a different situation that you're navigating. You might have older children, you might have twins, you might have toddlers and older children, you might have all sorts going on in your household. So take the bits that sort of make sense to you when you're listening. So in Cornwall, we have about a year, 18 months ago, I was just out and about like I was, and I just noticed at the park quite a lot of adults, not necessarily parents, it could be grandparents, a lot of people looking at their phones when they're out and about and missing parts of stuff that was right in front of them. You know, sometimes I was just walking the dog and I noticed, children going down a slide and nobody really sharing that enjoyment, because people were just being distracted by their phones. And this sort of sat with me a little bit as I sort of went round the supermarket and went round on the buses and places, and just noticed actually how, as we know, distractible they are when we have these devices with us, alongside us. So the Phones Away Talk and Play campaign, we started in Cornwall in October, and we've been adding bits to our campaign over the time. So we had a survey of 400 plus parents, all locally, parents and carers and grandparents and adults. And half of those surveyed, about sort of 60%, said that yes, they do get distracted from noticing things. That's kind of how it is. A third of those people we surveyed did have concerns about their phones in front of their children. So that's why we thought we'd try and sort of support how that felt and make that sort of an explicit thing that we have locally. We also had we were working alongside health visitors, and health visitors were saying to us that they'd noticed some babies smiling a little bit later when they were doing some of their visits. So we were a bit curious about that, thinking about what might be happening there. Early years settings, noticing a few things with little ones coming in. So we were just sort of thinking about that in terms of how we can support. So we're thinking, going back to the early brain stuff that we just heard, which is I'm also really interested in the sort of work I do with in my parent infant team here in Cornwall. We think so much about the importance of those sort of early social connections, and particularly in my work with the under fives. And we know from science, that we just heard, that babies are wired the moment they're born for social connection and for that interaction. And I know that at Babyzone, you had a podcast recently when you talked about the interaction engine, which sort of talks about those important early interactions as prerequisites to language and things. So we know that the primitive brain, when a baby arrives, is really ready to be noticed and to be seen and to have that social contact through looking and talking and noticing and watching. And babies, it's fascinating when I found this out, not actually that long ago, but babies are really pre-programmed to be looking at faces, when they're born, with that sort of 20 to 30 centimeters, they can register faces. I've got my little bear here. This is my visual prompt. So we know that if you're feeding your baby, bottle feeding or breastfeeding, this is the optimum sort of distance that babies can see. And how it is important that we notice all the little tiny things throughout the day, even when we have very, very small babies in our care. So when we observe those sort of really small interactions, we notice children looking at us. We notice babies turning. They like to be seen in what they're doing. Perhaps if they're having a nappy change, or perhaps if they're sitting with some toys on the floor and you're busy doing something else, they will look and check in. Babies are really good at sort of showing that they want that sort of interaction. They might be playing with a rattle and then turn. So we know that having those backwards and forwards turn-taking interactions build that brain up to be really wired for language in the future and learning and more play. But we're really conscious that if we perhaps are distracted by our phones and looking down, we might miss a lot of those connections and a lot of those minuscule daily moments. So thinking about what we can do to sort of make that a bit easier. So I will be getting to those bits, just coming to that. So when we have these little connections of moments, it's also nice to think about how they make us feel. We know that when we have a smile from somebody, when we get a recognition from somebody, it makes us feel warm inside. And I think as busy parents, wherever you may be listening to this, don't underestimate those tiny little small things that you do every day, those little smiles you make, the little thumbs up, the little check-ins that you do. They all build up that connection and support for your little ones. It might be that it's not always about the intensity of playing with the children all the time. That's also what I'm thinking about. It's about the little moments you might have sitting on the bus together. It might be the little moments when you're in a coffee shop together. It might be the moments when you have a little hug before they go into preschool. It might be the walk to Granny's house. It might be any moments when you can have time together where you are totally in the moment. And that's about thinking about how us being on our own phone may disrupt those moments and how that can happen so easily. And children wanting to be on phones could, as we know, children are social beings. They see us. They want to copy the grown-ups. They copy us when we pretend to make a coffee. They copy us when we're washing up. When they go to preschool, they go to the home corner and they practice making pizzas. And the world they're seeing is adults being on these devices. So I think it's natural that they're drawn to that too. So if we can create space where we have more time, when we're more focused, perhaps that is going to support young people to have that more attuned time with us as adults. The more social interaction we can have, the better that will be. So I hope that sort of makes sense so far. We're just thinking about little children, how they do copy. But I was talking about to a mum the other day. I think I've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Jess, just want to double check my timing.
Yes, yeah, got about 5 minutes.
Okay, that's all right. I just want to double check. So I was talking to a mum the other day, and we were having a conversation about it, and she was sharing with me that actually when she was a bit surprised when I'd explained about the distance a baby could see. She hadn't realised that, and she had her second baby, and she said, "Oh, I feel a bit bad now because when I was feeding the other day, I was on my phone and I was looking at Vinted and I was looking for a new baby grow, and I was completely not looking at my baby." And I said, "That's so, you know, you that in that moment, that's what you did. That's fine, but perhaps from now on, you can really." She said, "From now on, I'm going to really make a bit of a conscious thing about putting it away when I'm feeding, because it's exactly as we said, these things around us are very distracting and it's very easy, and we're used to using it. Perhaps when we do have spare moments, it's very easy to pick something up and think, I'll just have a look at this, and then before we know it, we're distracted. So what can we do in the everyday moments of your lives? I suppose it's about being mindful and conscious about what we're using our phones in front of our children, and being ready to connect for as much of the day as we can be. So if you think about the routine of your life, it might be first thing in the morning. We know it's not good to be on our phone or a gadget for at least an hour when we wake up. It's really important for our brains to wake up slowly. So perhaps that's a time where you might be thinking to yourself, right, I don't need to look at it. I'm going to be really conscious. When I get my baby up, it's going to be in another room when we're doing our breakfast time. So think about day times in your day where perhaps you can consciously put any distractible things away from sight. There's some other things that are really helpful is put some notifications on that keep things silent a period of times. Turn off the notifications that you can. There's some quite useful downtime tools that you can find on most things that are really helpful. And I think somebody gave me this top tip, which I'll share, which I think is quite helpful, is having sort of a really conscious use of when you're getting something out in front of your children. Like it might be that with, a child might say, "Oh, you're on your phone, mum, and can I have it? Can I have it? I want to look." But if you're really conscious, say, "I'm sending Granny a message to say we're seeing her for tea tomorrow," then you put it down. Or perhaps I'm just checking the weather is going to be dry at the park, and then putting it down. But actually, if we're really conscious about what we're using our technology for, that is a really good model for children to know it's a purposeful tool, and then it's put away, and the connection and the time together is the priority. Sometimes it feels like we just need to slow down a bit and have these pauses in the day as well, where we allow ourselves to be more in that moment. And things can wait. I think we're in a society which is very busy, and we can feel that we have to respond straight away, but it's sometimes okay just for things to wait whilst we spend those time with our little ones. It's really nice to think about being kind to yourself as well, because I think small steps, try these things gently, and I think the more we can model it as well, it might be easier then to model it for our children. So we've had from Dr. Gianni that, we've got the advice about different types of screen use for our young people. But I suppose I'm just supporting you to think about how we can model that ourselves as parents too. So be kind to yourself, small steps, try something, perhaps try something later this afternoon. Maybe it might be at bedtime or bath time. It's completely out of the way in a different room, downstairs. Maybe if you're having a walk at the park, your phone's in your bottom of your bag turned off, or on silent for a while, so that we're not distracted within our pockets. But have a go, and when you've tried it, chat to a friend and see how it goes. That would be some of my tips. Thanks, Jess. Is that okay for my timing?
Perfectly timed. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we've had some questions in, and Claire and Sarah from the Babyzone team are just collating those. While we're doing that, I've just got a really quick favour to ask from the parents and families who are tuned in today. So Sarah and Claire are just going to drop a link into the chat, and it's called our PCI survey, which stands for Parent Confidence Index Survey. It's a very short study that we're running currently to understand how parenting confidence changes over time for families coming into Babyzone. It takes less than 5 minutes to fill in, and everyone who completes the surveys are entered into our prize draw to win either a £100 or £20 Amazon voucher. So that link is just going into the chat. If you could participate in that, if you do attend a Babyzone hub in your own time, and the link is being sent to you now. So thank you so much. It's how we measure the difference that Babyzone hub makes to families, and gathering your voice for this really does make a difference to us. So thank you so much. Okay. So we can now have our Q&A session. I think we've still got some questions coming in, so I'll start. Obviously, Penny and Dr. Shivani, you can jump in if you both have something to say, or I might try and direct a question to each of you if it seems more appropriate. But the first one, I think either or both can answer. Someone has asked, what's the proper age for a child to own a phone? Is there research around that?
Well, I'll have to answer a question with a question. Why does the child need a phone? As human beings have grown up for millennia without phones. I will personally need to understand that first.
So perhaps if the person who's asked that question wants to follow up with their thoughts as well, we can come back to that one. So someone else has asked the question, why do schools introduce screens at such a young age when there is now evidence of the harm that they do? Is there a difference between using a screen for educational purposes? My eldest is in reception, and since she was 4 years old, her school have requested that they use an app to access a particular software to compete against other schools. Any thoughts?
I don't mind answering that. I think it's there's some more guidance being shared with early years settings. The Birth to 5 Matters document, which is really good, is going to be sharing some more advice about that, especially for the early years settings. But I think it might be a nice thing for that parent to maybe curiously ask the question to the school too, to say, I think that's to have that conversation, because I think it's, be nice. We know that also homework on screens isn't great if it's going to encourage that sort of use in the evening when they could be doing other things. So I suppose it's about having a curious question to the school and feeling that'd be okay. I think you might be pleasantly surprised about the reaction if you have that conversation and if you have that relationship with the staff. Yeah.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
I'm going to be less politically correct than Penny. I think it probably started in COVID, and of course there were extenuating circumstances. Probably started well-meaning. However, we now know that the so-called EdTech initiative is not good for children. There are many theories as to why it's embedded. Obviously, inducements and financial advantages. The school gets sort of recompense for having EdTech in schools. However, science is now telling us it is not a good idea. The best way to learn is pen and paper, etc., usual traditional ways of learning. And in fact, Scandinavia have abandoned their EdTech movement. There's a lot of science evidence that shows that fact retention, understanding, etc., all of that is better with traditional methods. And giving a child a screen, albeit a slightly older age, and emojis sort of congratulating the child for having achieved something is not a good way of learning. And in addition, children are often spending time on these screens doing other things rather than learning. So our government has wholeheartedly embraced this, and the previous government has as well. I'm hoping if we first of all get the social media ban in place, then we can start agitating about the ed tech, the problems with ed tech. But in the meantime, you're right, Penny, please do ask, because the evidence is actually not supportive.
Thank you. We're getting quite a few questions in specifically around television, so I'm going to sort of summarize a couple into one question. So someone has asked, is it okay to show my 2-year-old children's programs on a big TV screen, and is background television okay?
Do you want to answer that first, and I'll come back?
Okay, yeah, sure. Indeed, I personally get asked this question very frequently. Now, let's state the obvious. You cannot put a television in your pocket and disappear in your bedroom, which is what a lot of teenagers do with smartphones. Number one. Number two, and of course, you have no idea what they're doing in their bedrooms on their smartphones. So that's a massive problem. But number two, watching a television is often a more communal experience. And there's research telling us that actually sitting down and watching something with your child and talking about it helps them learn proactively, helps their vocabulary. There's a lot of evidence of co-viewing is really helpful. And of course, unlike the toxic, poisonous social media apps, which predispose to infinite scrolling because there's continuous stream of feeds, after a program on the television, it comes to a stop. And therefore, the child knows this program has finished, and you can move on to doing other things. So yes, television is definitely better. And like anything in life, it has to be with moderation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's if you're sitting down together on the sofa and you're having your cup of tea and your little one's got a drink and you're sitting there watching something together that's slow paced, the CBeebies on iPlayer are really good places. You have to be a bit more careful with some other fast-paced programs, but the slower the pace and the slower the story for a 2-year-old would be really good. I think you also have to be careful about, sometimes they do play on the next episode actually, so you do have to turn that off. But it's really, I think the background TV, if I do a visit, I find it quite difficult because I like to sort of concentrate, and I find it quite distracting. I think that's just my own sort of learning, that I find it quite distracting with the TV on. So I do encourage people to turn it off, just so that the children's play can be really developed and the language and the chat can be there. So yeah.
Thank you. And I think this has probably mostly answered another question that we had from someone who asked about, does screen time include television? This parent was saying, we don't use tablets or phones. We prioritise longer form programmes or films on the TV, which we mostly watch together. They do ask, is it better, or is this better, which I think you've already answered, or should it still be capped at 1 hour, which I think you were starting to then answer, Penny, about, as you say, some episodes can just carry on and on and on. You could sit there infinitely. But I think that hopefully answers that question. I have another one here. Again, it's along the lines of something which is being asked quite often. So this parent says, my 21-month-old toddler daughter is very much distracted with the phone when she's eating, even when she's meeting other people. When someone gives her a phone, she goes to them. She gets very angry. She shows temper. I'm not sure how to control it, but I also need it to settle her sometimes. So not so much of a question here, rather than a struggle that a parent is facing. Have you got any advice?
I really see that. That's really difficult, isn't it? Because they want to have this object that we have. They're interested. They're curious. They want to know, what is it you're looking at on there, and what is it? And when they see it, it's quite a delightful, busy, active. Gives them that attention hit that that they might be looking for. But I suppose it's just persevering slowly and doing it and being really, and like we said, perhaps it will pass the moments of, the less that they have in time on the phone or with it or holding it or looking at it, the easier it will become. But I do understand it is really difficult when they've got into a habit and then they, have those moments like a 2-year-old would. But perhaps it's worth drawing in. I know the Babyzone, you've got that sort of nest way of thinking, and perhaps if you go to a Babyzone hub, you might be able to learn a bit about that, where you sort of have that opportunity to sort of regulate with your child together and say, I know that you wanted to have mummy's phone, but I've put it in my bag. We're not, you're too little to see it today, or we're going to look at the ducks, or we're going to look at the bus, or whatever it might be. But it's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really difficult, but you then have the choice of allowing a habit to become entrenched, and going to be that issue is going to be more difficult to solve the older they get, or however difficult it is, which it is, nip it in the bud now. And of course, your own habit, you have to be the role model for sure. But I would take a stand now rather than when your child is older.
Thank you. This is a different kind of question that's just come in, sort of turns things on its head. It says, we always hear about how much screen time is too much, but I'm curious, how much screen time is actually not enough these days? Just an interesting question.
I don't think we need to have screen time. I think we can live a beautiful life without, as we were saying, it wasn't that long ago that we just had a television that children's programs finished at. It wasn't very long ago that the children's programs finished at 6, did they? And or the CBeebies went to bed at 7. So I suppose there isn't, it's useful to have. We are living in a digital world, so experience the children when they're old enough to be taught technology as a tool, to use them to help them as they need to navigate the world. But I don't think that's different to, screens for the sake of learning to be on a screen. So I suppose as long as it's got a purpose, I would advise.
Thank you. I have another interesting question here. My partner and I disagree on screen rules. Do you have any advice for that? And there's been quite a few about the strain it can put on a relationship, because obviously disagreements over what's acceptable and what's not in the household.
I personally, when I talk to parents, and that's why I always load my lectures with science, because that's sort of almost irrefutable. And then I say to parents, like I have a few times, A, parenting is difficult, B, this is going to be a struggle, but ultimately, most parents want the best for their child and their children. And if you know that you're giving your child a device which is actively causing them harm, then I think that basically wins the argument. And there's a huge amount of evidence. There's a mountain of evidence out there now, which can be used to convince the other person that actually this is not good. And the most frightening, and it's something that gets the parents to sit up and take notice, is when I talk about brain scans showing abnormalities even in young children. And no parent would want that. I says, oh my God, really? And then, they start to take notice.
Yeah. Thank you. And I was just also thinking on that note, it's about, I suppose, building confidence with each other as a parent, isn't it? It's thinking about actually everyone has their own strengths, and perhaps, between the two people working out what their strengths are as parents, and working out, navigating actually which bits they can both do together.
Thank you so much. So I think we're nearly at time now, so I'm going to draw it to a close. Thank you so much, Dr. Nichani, and thank you so much, Penelope. It's been really insightful and really wonderful to hear you speak on these topics, which I know that our families have been asking for more information and more support with. So thank you so much. Just before you go, everyone who's watching, we've got one last poll that should pop up on your screen. If you wouldn't mind, it'll just take a few seconds. It's really helpful for us to hear if this webinar has been impactful for you, or made you think about something you might change. So we'd be very, very grateful for you to interact with that. And then again, just once again, thank you so much to Dr. Nichani and Penelope. It's been a pleasure having you both. I know our families will take so much away from this. Thank you to everyone who has joined with us today for the webinar. Whether you're a regular Babyzone family or this is your very first time with us, we are so glad you came. And we hope to see you in our next webinar session as well. So look out for information on that. We'll be sharing a recording of today's session. So if you know someone who couldn't make it, please do pass it on. If you'd love us to cover a particular topic or something that you're really interested to find out more about in a future webinar, please do drop it in the chat before you leave, or send us an email via the email address on our Babyzone website. We really do read every single question that you send and every email that you send. And lastly, just take care of yourselves, and we'll see you again soon. And thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.